Let's talk about something you already know deep down, but probably haven't put into words yet. There's someone in your life, maybe they drifted in and out, maybe they still do. When you're with them, it's electric, but when you need them, they're gone. They pull away when you get close. They ghost when things get too real. And worst of all, they make you feel like the crazy one for caring. You know what that is. That's not love. That's an avoidant attachment style. And the moment you stop playing their game, they do exactly what I'm about to tell you. Avoidants want connection, but only on their terms. They want closeness, but not commitment. They want attention, but not responsibility. So the second you stop chasing, the second you stop tolerating crumbs, they panic. Not because they love you more, but because they're losing control. So what do? They come back, but not with clarity, not with real intention. No, they come back with just enough affection to reel you back into their dance. They text you something nostalgic. They comment on your story. They ask to catch up sometime. You're not crazy for feeling confused. That's the point. It's designed to hook you without giving you anything real. But here's the truth. The moment you stop playing the game, you stop giving them the reward of your energy without the cost of real intimacy. And guess what? That's when their game starts to fall apart. You don't owe anyone an explanation for choosing peace over emotional chaos. You don't need to earn love by tolerating inconsistency. And you're not too much for wanting clarity. You're just finally done accepting less. Don't let someone else's emotional unavailability become your emotional prison. When you stop playing the avoidance game, you win, not because they chase you, but because you finally stop chasing them. Avoidants operate from a place of fear of intimacy, fear of vulnerability, fear of losing control. To someone with an avoidant attachment style, getting too close feels threatening, even if it's what they secretly crave. They may want love, but only if it doesn't come with the risks that love naturally brings. So, rather than opening up and connecting in a healthy, reciprocal way, they protect themselves by creating emotional distance. They keep you just far enough away that they can feel safe, but close enough to maintain your attention. This is the heart of the control dynamic they rely on. When someone seeks control more than connection, it creates a relationship where you, not them, do all the emotional heavy lifting. They don't have to be consistent because you're the one always reaching out. They don't have to be vulnerable because you're the one who shares first. In their mind, if they can keep control of the emotional pace, then they're not in danger of getting hurt. But what this really does is create a lopsided emotional equation where your needs are optional and theirs are central. Avoidants use mixed signals as a strategy. One day, they'll show up with affection or warmth. The next, they'll disappear or shut down emotionally. This isn't random. It's a push-pull tactic, often unconscious, that keeps you in a state of uncertainty. And in uncertainty, people tend to work harder for approval. You begin to interpret their breadcrumbs as signs of depth, when in reality, it's often a way to keep control of the dynamic without offering true intimacy. You start wondering what you did wrong, what you need to fix, how you can win them back. That's not love. That's manipulation, even if it's unintentional. This need for control shows up in subtle ways. They avoid conversations about the future. They deflect or change the subject when emotions get too real. They delay labeling the relationship. They minimize your feelings by calling you too sensitive or too intense. It's not that they don't feel anything. It's that feeling something deeply makes them uncomfortable. So, to protect themselves, they maintain emotional leverage by keeping you guessing. If they sense you're pulling away, they might momentarily shift tactics. Suddenly, they're attentive again. But it's not about real connection. It's about regaining control. It's about restoring the balance that keeps them emotionally safe. And the moment they feel you're too close again, they'll pull back just as fast. That's the cycle approach, retreat. The reality is you will never feel secure with someone who prioritizes control over connection. The rules of their game are rigged to keep you invested without ever requiring them to meet you halfway. They fear being vulnerable more than they fear losing you. And as long as that's true, they'll keep using control as their form of safety. When an avoidant person senses that you're no longer chasing them, they often return, not with genuine vulnerability, but with just enough emotional bait to re-engage you. Their return isn't about building something real. It's about restoring the dynamic where they feel desired without having to offer full emotional availability. So they reach out in subtle, calculated ways: a late night, I miss you, text, a comment on your social media, or a vague suggestion to meet up soon. These gestures seem romantic or thoughtful on the surface, but if you look closer, you'll see they lack intention, direction, and follow through. This is how ambiguity becomes their weapon of choice. They thrive in the gray area. It allows them to be present enough to keep you emotionally invested, but distant enough to avoid true commitment. They'll say things like, I've been thinking about you, or I don't know what we are, but I care, or let's not label it. Let's just go with the flow. These lines create hope without providing clarity. It's not a yes, but it's also not a no. That uncertainty keeps your emotional door open, and they know it. Avoidants don't usually come back with accountability. They rarely say, I was wrong, or I realize I hurt you. Instead, they bypass the hard emotional labor by slipping back into your life with charm, familiarity, and a kind of emotional nostalgia. And because you may have been waiting for them to wake up or come to their senses, it's easy to interpret their return as growth. But growth without ownership isn't growth at all, it's performance. This return is designed not to repair the damage, but to reset the pattern. They want to pick up where they left off without addressing why they left in the first place. It's not malicious, it's habitual. It's how they protect themselves from getting too close while still reaping the emotional benefits of your presence. They crave the emotional high of reconnection, not the emotional depth of resolution. That's why they can reappear with warmth, but still resist defining the relationship or showing consistency. Their actions say, don't forget me, but their commitment says, don't count on me. You may find yourself replaying their words, overanalyzing the small gestures, hoping there's more meaning behind them than what's being shown. That's part of the emotional loop they create, keeping you emotionally busy while they stay emotionally guarded. You start filling in the blanks they leave, assuming that the connection means as much to them as it does to you. But when someone offers you affection without clarity, what they're giving you is not love. It's a placeholder for the real connection you deserve, the kind that doesn't rely on vague texts and half efforts. What you have to understand is that ambiguity isn't a temporary state for avoidance. It's the space they choose to occupy because it offers the illusion of closeness without the responsibility of emotional presence. And until that changes, their returns will keep looking like promises, but feeling like reruns. When you stop reacting to an avoidant's inconsistent behavior, something powerful happens. Their illusion of control begins to crumble. For someone who thrives on emotional distance, your engagement, whether it's positive or frustrated, is fuel. Every time you reach out, question their intentions, or seek clarity, you're signaling that they still hold emotional power over you. That power gives them a sense of safety. They don't have to come closer because they already know you're still invested. But when you go quiet, when you step back without making a scene, it disrupts everything they've come to expect from you. Avoidants are used to being the one who sets the pace. They pull away and you come closer. They go cold and you try harder. It reinforces their belief that they can stay distant and still have access to your affection. This dynamic gives them a sense of emotional security. They don't have to be vulnerable because you will always close the gap. But when you stop playing your role, the rhythm changes. Suddenly, they're no longer in control of how close or far the relationship feels. That's uncomfortable for them and sometimes even alarming. That discomfort doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it shows up subtly. They might start watching your stories more often. They may send a neutral check-in message like, hey, how have you been? Or even like a post just to remind you they're still there. These aren't signs of deep change, they're tests. They want to see if you'll re-engage, if you'll return to the emotional pattern they're familiar with. If you do, the cycle resumes. If you don't, they're forced to confront a reality they don't like. They're no longer the one in charge. Your silence can create anxiety in someone who's used to emotional dominance. But that anxiety doesn't necessarily mean they're ready to change. It just means their control is slipping. That's why some avoidants come back with a sudden burst of attention, not because they've had a revelation, but because they want to re-establish their influence. The moment you stop responding the way you used to, they realize the emotional environment is no longer predictable. That unpredictability, ironically, is what they've been putting you through all along. Now they're the ones on uneven ground. Taking back your energy isn't about punishing the avoidant, it's about protecting yourself. It's about refusing to participate in a pattern that only leaves you drained and uncertain. When you stop reacting, you reclaim your emotional space. You stop dancing around their defenses and start standing in your self-worth. And that, more than anything, is what shifts the power dynamic. Avoidants often mistake silence for rejection, when in reality, it's often a boundary, a quiet, dignified way of saying, I'm no longer willing to bleed for scraps of attention. That silence forces them to either confront their behavior or walk away. Either way, your non-reaction is the moment the game stops working, and that changes everything. Wanting emotional consistency does not make you needy. It makes you emotionally healthy. Somewhere along the way, especially in relationships with avoidant partners, people begin to question whether their expectations are too high. They start to shrink their needs to accommodate someone else's limitations. They learn to normalize uncertainty, mixed signals, and lukewarm commitment as if that's just the way relationships are. But the truth is, it's not. Wanting someone to show up, to be honest, to follow through on what they say. They're not extravagant demands, they're the bare minimum. And when you begin to doubt that, you're not becoming more understanding, you're becoming disconnected from yourself. Avoidants are often uncomfortable with emotional intensity, and rather than acknowledging their discomfort or working through it, they may label your desire for clarity as being too much. They'll make subtle comments that shame emotional expression. They may say you're overanalyzing, overreacting, or reading into things that aren't that deep. And over time, those statements chip away at your confidence. You start to second guess yourself. You hesitate before expressing how you feel. You try to become more chill or low maintenance. Not because it's who you are, but because it's who you think they want you to be. But shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's emotional bandwidth isn't love, it's self-abandonment. And the more you do it, the further you move from the kind of relationship that actually nourishes you. There is nothing wrong with wanting a partner who can sit in discomfort with you, who can hear your feelings without retreating, and who can be consistent in both words and actions. Those are not traits of someone who is needy. They are traits of someone who understands what healthy connection requires. Emotional consistency is not about perfection. It's not about someone being available 24/7 or never making mistakes. It's about showing up with integrity. It's about knowing where you stand with someone, even during conflict. It's about being able to rely on their presence, not having to guess whether they're in or out every time things get real. When you have to spend more time decoding someone's behavior than actually connecting with them, that's not a sign of your emotional sensitivity. It's a sign that something fundamental is missing in the relationship. And here's the thing, the people who make you feel like you're too much are often the same ones who are giving you far too little. That imbalance is what creates emotional confusion. You think if you were just different, quieter, more patient, less expressive, then maybe they would stay. But the right person doesn't need you to be less. They value the parts of you that want depth, truth, and consistency. They see emotional clarity not as a burden, but as a foundation. If someone can't meet you there, it's not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of where they are emotionally, and more importantly, where they're not. Closure is one of the most misunderstood concepts in relationships, especially when you've been dealing with someone emotionally unavailable or avoidant. We think closure is something the other person gives us, a final conversation, an apology, an explanation that will suddenly make everything make sense. But when someone has spent the entire relationship dodging responsibility, withholding clarity, and keeping you in a state of emotional limbo, they're not likely to become the source of peace at the end. Waiting for them to give you closure becomes just another form of waiting for them to show up the way they never have. And that wait can stretch on indefinitely if you let it. Avoidants often exit relationships the same way they enter them, on their terms, in a way that minimizes emotional exposure for them and maximizes confusion for you. They may disappear without warning, or they may slowly fade out, using silence or vague excuses to avoid directly confronting the end. In doing so, they leave you with a story that feels unfinished. The absence of answers creates an emotional vacuum, and it's natural to want to fill that space with something, anything, that helps you make sense of what happened. But often the search for closure becomes an extension of the same dynamic. You doing the emotional work while they avoid it. What real closure requires is not a final word from them, but a final word from you. It's the moment you decide to stop chasing the version of the relationship you hoped it could be and accept the reality of what it actually was. That kind of closure isn't about bitterness. It's about reclaiming your narrative. You realize that the explanation you're waiting for probably exists in their unhealed patterns, not in your lack of worth. You understand that you can grieve the connection without making excuses for the behavior that hurt you. Walking away without closure from them is one of the hardest things you can do, but it's also one of the most powerful. It means you are choosing your peace over their ambiguity. You are choosing to stop opening the door to someone who only ever stood halfway in. That's not cold. That's courageous. It takes real strength to let go of someone when your heart still has questions. It takes even more strength to trust that not all questions need to be answered by them in order for you to heal. When you stop waiting for their words, their remorse, their clarity, you stop living in reaction to their emotional limitations. You begin to build your own closure piece by piece through truth, self-reflection, and boundaries. You stop trying to understand why they couldn't show up and start focusing on why you deserve someone who can. And that shift from needing something from them to giving something to yourself is what true closure looks like. It's not dramatic. It's not loud. Sometimes it's just a quiet decision to no longer let someone's absence define your worth. So here's the truth. When you stop playing the avoidance game, the game falls apart, not because they suddenly become someone new, but because you stopped being the version of you who tolerated confusion, silence, and inconsistency. You started choosing yourself, and that's where the shift happens. You don't need to beg for clarity. You don't have to fight to prove your worth. The right connection doesn't keep you guessing. It brings you peace. So if you're walking away today without the apology, the explanation, or the closure you hoped for, know this, you're not empty-handed. You're walking away with your dignity, your self-trust, your peace. And none of those are up for negotiation anymore. Thank you for giving your time, your heart, and your attention to this message. I hope it reminded you of something you already knew but needed to hear out loud. You're not too much. You were just giving too much to someone who couldn't meet you. Take care of your heart, protect your energy, and remember, walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Thank you and take care.